Hi, I'm Leigh Barbour, and I'm an author of romance. In this presentation, you will be learning about the various subgenres of romance. The romance you want to write will most likely fit into one of the subgenres listed on the next screen. Listed on your screen are the various types of subgenres of romance. When you are pitching your story to a publisher, they will classify your romance in one of these subgenres. I have chosen to cover erotic romance first because there are some very important points to make here. Erotic romance is not erotica. Erotica is sex for sex's sake. Erotic romance is a romance that contains a number of erotic scenes. In any kind of romance, you should write the story so that if all the sex scenes were removed, you'd still have a romance. In other words, never let the sex become the plot of your story. A contemporary romance is a story set in today's world. I like reading contemporary romance because the dialogue is so edgy and fun. You can use lots of slang if you want to. One thing that is easier for the writer to do in contemporary romance is to build the world. Remember, though, that people will want a good geographic setting. For example, if you're writing about Seattle, let them know by mentioning the Space Needle, or the ocean, or the lush foliage, etc. Since you are writing in a world we are all familiar with, you do not have to do quite as much world building as in other genres. Everyone knows how people dress today. Everyone knows the political system we live under, etc. In other genres, that may not be so. Historical romance is very popular, but you should know that certain historical periods sell better than others. One historical that is very popular is Regency, which is set in the period of the English Regency or the early 19th century. If you decide to write Regency, you must have an enormous amount of knowledge of this historical period. If you don't, readers will know. In fact, when writing about any historical period, do your research. You'll probably find that doing the research is almost as much fun as writing the book. There are some very interesting websites that deal with the clothing of almost every century. I've also found that there are some interesting nonfiction books out there that can give you some very interesting knowledge about that specific time period you are writing about. Another period that sells rather well is the Civil War. Naturally, you can write about any historical period you want to, but be aware that not all periods sell as well as others. So you may want to know more about these reader preferences before starting your novel. Here are just a very few of the resources that are out there on the web for you to take advantage of when writing a novel. As great as these resources are, I must caution you that many writers get too carried away with their research. Remember, readers aren't reading your book to find out what kind of buttons are on a Revolutionary War soldier's uniform, nor do they really care about the size of the hoop skirt your heroine is wearing. They simply want you to devise a setting with interesting characters and titillate them with a romance. We'll talk about description later, but keep this in mind. Don't let research get you carried away. Suspense. Everybody gets caught up in suspense. That's why movies have chase scenes. I understand that romantic suspense came about because whether it's a book or a movie, a man will read or watch a romance if it has suspense in it. Women wanted books and movies that they could enjoy along with their husbands. Most of my books have suspense in them. And when I mean suspense, it's not always involving violence, but there is some secret that can have drastic consequences to your characters if something happens. Many writers find it very difficult to write romantic suspense because you have the burden of keeping the interest into the romance while you've got the breathtaking suspense marching on. The best way to write one of these is to make sure that your hero and heroine are both caught up in the suspense taking place, and the outcome of the suspense has to have dire consequences. Remember, your job when you're writing is to make the reader turn that next page. Suspense is a way to really build tension. Don't reveal the resolution until the end, and make it so the hero and heroine can only be together totally after the suspense is resolved. Everything I have published so far has been paranormal romance. Paranormal is a break with reality. As with the other types of romance, you need to be careful not to let the fantasy or magic or whatever is happening take over the story. The main focus is on the romance, and not how your hero flew through 5 galaxies and annihilated hundreds of Klingons. It's about the feeling that drove him to do it and how he woos her. Paranormals can be about any time period, even contemporary or futuristic. You can feature witches, ghosts, aliens, or any type of characters. Today, urban fantasy involving vampires is very popular. Also, novels with wolves as a hero are selling well. You may now be thinking that you'd like to write about urban fantasy because it's what the publishers want. Well, be careful about that. The publishing world is fickle. By the time you're finished with that novel, they may be looking for something else. I have written one science fiction novel, and as much as I loved my characters, I must admit it was the hardest thing I've ever written. You're probably wondering why. Well, the problem is world building. If you're describing an alien, you have to describe everything about that character. Why? Because no one has any idea how that alien looks but you. The same thing is true about the settings. It may be a spaceship they are traveling around on, but the reader can't imagine it until you describe the decks, the dining halls, etc. On the other hand, you are very free as you are writing. In other words, you aren't tied to Earth. Characters can fly around. They can press a button and have traveled millions of miles in a single heartbeat. Let's talk about description for a minute. Today, no one is going to pick up a novel and read pages and pages of a description of a setting. I was always a James Michener fan, where he might spend an entire chapter describing a single beach scene or bunch of rocks. Readers today don't want to be bogged down with that. You will need to develop your ability to describe things in just a few powerful words. I have always loved time travel. And time travel romance is fun to write because you're having 2 characters come together, usually from 2 different time periods, and their interactions are quite often comical because of the differences in the 2 worlds they come from. Remember that in time travel, you have to do a very good job of world building in both places. You have to have a setting and a cast of characters for both periods, usually. The understanding of each other has to transcend both worlds. She won't fit in his world, and he won't fit into hers unless they make changes on both sides. Also remember that whenever you input paranormal elements, the characters have to realistically deal with a situation that violates the laws of nature as they know them. Don't allow them to believe too quickly. Have them fight this strange state of events, and use that to build conflict between the 2. Remember, in romance, the couple can't get together too easily.